Coming up on Arirang News. It's the first day of South Korea lifting its face mask mandate for most indoor places after it's been in place for more than 2 years. And health authorities say the mask-wearing rule could be completely dropped at all venues in the next couple of months. The World Health Organization is keeping its highest level of global alert over COVID-19. The agency says the virus continues to constitute a public health emergency of international concern. Amid the spike in heating bills in South Korea, President Yoon approves more than $81 million in emergency funds to help unprivileged households. This will be added on to the existing budget in doubling the value of energy vouchers for them.
Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea, and thank you for joining us on Arirang News. Starting today, people in the country were able to remove their masks in most indoor spaces for the first time in more than 2 years. And some health officials say the rule could be completely scrapped in the next couple of months at all places. Our Song Yoo-jin starts us off.
South Korea has taken its first step toward normal life by lifting its indoor mask mandate. From Monday, mask wearing is only required on public transport, at care facilities, and hospitals and pharmacies. And it won't be too long before the rule is scrapped completely.
We believe by May, mask wearing won't be necessary in all venues. The exact date of dropping the rule will be decided after taking into account expert opinions on the virus situation.
But it will take a bit more time before the only remaining social distancing rule is dropped, the 7-day self-isolation for those who test positive, as experts believe chances of mass infections are still high. Health officials are strongly recommending mask wearing to prevent an uptick in COVID numbers. First, those who are vulnerable to infections, including those aged 60 and over, as well as those with underlying health conditions. Also, anyone who comes into close contact with them. Second, those who've tested positive to COVID or have COVID-like symptoms. Third, anyone visiting densely populated areas or venues.
Data shows that among those aged 60 and over who caught COVID in the country, around 3 in 1,000 are dying. Another 3 are in critical condition and are prone to long COVID, such as pulmonary fibrosis. The situation is more severe for those aged 80 and over, as 1 out of 100 confirmed cases is dying.
Besides mask wearing, health authorities are encouraging the senior population to get the updated bivalent boosters. They're known to be effective against the highly transmissible Omicron variant and its sublineages. Currently, less than half, 48% of those aged 80 and over, have gotten the jab. This comes as the country saw the lowest number of new COVID-19 infections on Monday in almost 7 months at 7,416. This is due to less testing over the weekend, but still, the figure was down more than 1,800 from the week before. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
As we've just heard, mask wearing is no longer required in most indoor venues from today. Those include schools, gyms, stores, and subway stations. But many people still seem to be a little reluctant. Kim Jung-sil reports.
High school students return after their winter break. While it's the first day back at school, it's also the first day of South Korea lifting its indoor mask mandate. Around 1 in 10 decided not to wear one, but when class began, most put them back on. Students told us that because they spent their entire time at high school so far with masks on, they have become used to wearing one. Then, if masks are needed in classrooms, where are they still mandatory? Hospitals and medical facilities, including nursing homes and care facilities, all require masks. They're mandatory in pharmacies as well. Masks are also required on public transport, but this doesn't include the bus, train, or subway station itself. Here on the platform, it's actually not mandatory to wear a mask when waiting for the subway, but as you can see, many are keeping their masks on as wearing one is still required inside the train carriages. We asked some of the passengers why they're still wearing the masks when it's not mandatory.
I think people will voluntarily wear masks for their own protection and not just because of the government's decision. That's why I'm wearing one right now.
I went to the gym this morning and many people weren't wearing masks, so I was able to take mine off as well. But I think I will continue to wear my mask when in confined, crowded places like stations.
Although wearing masks isn't mandatory anymore, South Korean health authorities say it's still recommended. They especially recommend them in confined and crowded spaces or if they have COVID-19 symptoms. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
The World Health Organization says COVID-19 remains a global health emergency. The latest decision comes exactly 3 years after COVID-19 was first declared a public health emergency of international concern, the highest level under international health regulations. But the agency's Director General said he's hopeful that the pandemic will no longer be considered a global emergency sometime next year, while calling on countries to do more to address the vulnerabilities in populations and health systems. He said he hopes the world will transition to a new phase and reduce hospitalizations and deaths to the lowest level possible. Officials from South Korea and Japan today held working-level talks in Seoul regarding compensation for the Koreans subjected to forced labor by Japan during Japanese colonial rule. They failed to reach an agreement but decided to hold talks at a higher level. Monday's meeting between the Director General for Asia and Pacific Affairs at Seoul's Foreign Ministry, Seo Min-jung, and her Japanese counterpart, Takehiro Funakoshi, comes 2 weeks after they last met at Japan's Foreign Ministry in Tokyo. Speaking to reporters after a 3-hour-long meeting, Seo said each side had different opinions on the issue and added the two countries will hold discussions at a higher level. Earlier this month, the South Korean government revealed plans to compensate the Korean victims through a public foundation instead of the Japanese firms accused, which sparked controversy. Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin is in South Korea for security talks. He and his Korean counterpart Lee Jong-sub are set to address ways to bolster deterrence against North Korea's military ambitions. Our defense correspondent Oh Soo-young has details.
America's defense policy for its allies who come under conventional or nuclear attack, known as its extended deterrence policy, will be at the heart of the discussion between Seoul and Washington on Tuesday. As South Korean Defense Minister Lee Jong-sub and his US counterpart Lloyd Austin iron out the details of their joint response to North Korea's increasing provocations, they're expected to add more flesh to the agreement they reached last November. This includes resuming large joint military drills this year, including the massive combined field training full legal exercise, which last took place in 2018. They also discussed holding the Rare Tabletop Exercises, or TTX, which simulate a joint response to emergencies such as nuclear attacks from North Korea. However, as Pyongyang continues to scale up its nuclear capabilities, with speculations that it's ready for a 7th weapons test, Washington's non-nuclear allies, namely Seoul and Tokyo, have been growing increasingly concerned about how to make extended deterrence work. The challenge is to build a credible mechanism that would turn assurances of US nuclear support into action.
In particular, the United States should work to share information more closely with South Korea about how US nuclear weapons would be employed in the event of North Korean aggressions. The United States should also listen to and incorporate South Korean concerns and feedback into its planning. While the Rugged Alliance lacks NATO's nuclear planning groups, it should work towards the same sort of consultation and planning that exists in the body.
I think it's also important to empower the U.S. forces in South Korea to be ready in a hypothetical scenario in which North Korea could use nuclear weapons. So it means that the United States forces in Korea, USFK, will have capabilities to respond to North Korea's nuclear weapons, and that means that the USFK commander, who also doubles as the commander for the Combined Forces Command, will have to have important access to important assets as well as weapon systems that the United States military has around the world to bring them together in case of a contingency situation in the Korean Peninsula.
The two defense chiefs are also expected to touch on how to deepen their security ties with Japan after the three countries last November agreed to share real-time information on North Korea's missiles. Other agendas on Tuesday could include key bilateral anniversary events was held in Washington as they mark 70 years of their bilateral military alliance this year. 오수영, Arirang News.
Seoul's Defense Ministry and NATO have reaffirmed their commitment to bolstering their global partnership amid growing security challenges. On Monday, South Korean Defense Minister Lee Jong-seop held talks with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, who's in Seoul. He expressed appreciation for NATO's consistent interest in Korean Peninsula security and the involvement of 11 NATO countries in the 1950 to 53 Korean War. Stoltenberg said Brussels backs South Korea's efforts for peace on the Korean Peninsula, calling Pyongyang's nuclear and missile ambitions a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. He added that South Korea has contributed to peace and stability in Europe by supporting efforts for Ukraine's defense against Russia's ongoing invasion. The two officials agreed to expand joint efforts on defense technology and seek new areas of cooperation. President Yoon Suk-yeol met with the visiting NATO Secretary General on Monday and pledged continued support for the people of Ukraine in their war against Russia. Seoul's top office released a statement saying that during their meeting at the nation's top office, Jens Stoltenberg explained the current situation in Ukraine, thanked President Yoon for South Korea's assistance, and stressed the importance of making sure the international community is not given the wrong message that an armed invasion is acceptable. The South Korean leader vowed to continue fulfilling possible roles together with the international community in providing help for the Ukrainian people. Earlier in the day, the NATO chief called on South Korea to supply military assistance to Ukraine, but Seoul's stance remains that it'll provide non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Amid a prolonged cold wave and spiraling heating bills in South Korea, President Yoon Suk-yeol approved $81.4 million in emergency funds to help low-income households. Yoon gave the approval just hours after the bill passed the weekly cabinet meeting on Monday, held a day earlier than regularly scheduled.
The bill was given swift approval by the president in the hopes of minimizing the burden of vulnerable citizens as they struggle through the unprecedented cold wave.
This emergency fund added to the existing $65 million budget that had already been earmarked makes a total of $146.4 million available in doubling the value of energy vouchers for nearly 1.2 million vulnerable households. Countries around the world have been facing rising energy costs in the face of a global surge in natural gas and heating fuel prices due to the conflict in Ukraine, with South Korea being no exception. South Korea's tax revenue rose by 15% last year, though still shorter than expected. More corporate income taxes were collected and less taxes from stock transactions amid bearish market. Kim Hyun-sung has the details.
Last year's tax revenue seems like it's going to come up short. According to the Finance Ministry on Monday, the estimated tax revenue for 2022 came in at almost 400 trillion Korean won, or more than $322 billion, with a margin of error of 0.2%. That's a 15% rise from the year before, but still short about $570 million compared to last year's revised supplementary budget. In May last year, the government passed its largest ever supplementary budget of more than 59 trillion Korean won, or more than $48 billion. At the time, the government ambitiously estimated that taxes would exceed spending by more than 53 trillion Korean won, or more than $43 billion. Deputy Prime Minister Chu Kyung-ho even said confidently that this was a conservative estimate. But the government's calculations turned out to be far off, and it seems to have spent more than it brought in for the first time since 2019. The finance minister explained that revenue jumped due to a rebound in consumer spending, but fell short because of the sluggish property market and companies that were affected by last year's typhoons. The full revised report on tax revenue is due out next month. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
In the auto industry, Korea's exports of cars hit a fresh high last year, mostly driven by global market demand for eco-friendly vehicles. Our business correspondent Lee Dae-yeon has the figures.
Record high car exports in 2022. South Korea's car exports surpassed $50 billion for the first time last year, despite the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and conflict in Europe. That's according to data released by the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Monday. The figure was up 16.4% on year to $54.1 billion, with eco-friendly cars one of the major contributing factors. Exports of these cars were up 38% on year to $16.1 billion in 2022, also hitting an all-time high. In terms of units, 554,000 cars were exported, an increase of over 36% from the previous year. Looking at eco-friendly cars, the export growth of electric vehicles stood out. The total number of EVs exported last year totaled around 224,000, up over 45% on year. 285,000 hybrid cars were exported, the most in the eco-friendly car category. One ministry official said the overseas release of new electric vehicle models and hybrid cars was the main factor. With chip supplies improving in the second half of last year, South Korean auto giants Hyundai Motor and Kia saw a rise in EV car production. The number of cars produced domestically last year was more than 3.7 million, up 8.5% from the previous year. And experts believe the country will become one of the top 5 global car producers in 2022. Domestic sales, on the other hand, dropped 2.4% on year to about 1.6 million. This is due to delays in delivering cars caused by a chip shortage in the first half quarter of 2022. Meanwhile, car production, domestic sales, and exports last month all grew compared to the same period the year before. December's exports totaled around $5.4 billion, an all-time high for any month. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korean companies and individuals have been filing more patents internationally despite the global economic slowdown. Last year, according to a report from the Korean Intellectual Property Office, the number of applications from South Korea under the Patent Cooperation Treaty rose from the year before by 6.8%. The total came to almost 22,000. Such applications can eventually lead to patents being approved in other countries. The report said small and medium-sized companies especially invested in technology to expand overseas, and in general, Korean companies look to secure their tech supply chains. The number of domestic patent applications, on the other hand, were about the same as the previous year. Surplus rice and falling prices have been an issue for South Korea for quite a while, leading the nation's opposition parties to pursue a revision of the Grain Management Act, a move the Yoon administration and the People Power Party have strongly been against. The opposition today unilaterally put the bill before Parliament for consideration. Our National Assembly correspondent Han Sung-woo has the details.
South Korea's opposition parties have voted unilaterally to put the opposition-led revision to the Grain Management Act before the National Assembly for consideration, which means it can now be further deliberated on as an agenda item moving forward. At the plenary meeting of January's extraordinary session, 157 out of 165 voting lawmakers voted for its consideration, after legislators from the ruling People Power Party exited in refusal. In hopes of stabilizing the plunging rice prices, the Democratic Party of Korea has been pushing for the government's purchase of surplus rice, A bill opposition floor leader Park Hong-gun earlier in the day said cannot wait any longer.
No longer can we turn a blind eye to desperate farmers tired of waiting. Today's plenary vote to put the rice purchase bill for consideration should be taken as a matter of course. I urge the Speaker of the National Assembly and the ruling People Power Party to make up their minds so that the item can be put on the agenda.
The ruling party, on the other hand, has objected to the bill, arguing that it will put stress on the national balance sheet in the long term by exacerbating overproduction and also weaken the competitiveness of local farmers. A position shared by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration.
If the revision bill is passed, we'll have no choice but to ask President Yoon Suk-yeol to exercise his power to veto.
Also passed unilaterally by opposition parties during Monday's plenary session without the ruling party present was the final report on the parliamentary probe into the Itaewon crowd crush, which 158 voters all voted for unanimously. The report was previously adopted unilaterally by the opposition at a special committee earlier this month, following much dispute with the ruling party over whether and how much the nation's interior minister should be held responsible. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
South Korean lawmakers have announced a new bipartisan group to carry out political reforms. A statement released on Monday read that the parliament needs to go back to a one that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. There are around 120 lawmakers in the group, which seeks electoral reform by holding a meeting every week and hold events to gather different opinions on the issue. This comes after concerns that the current system of single-member district election leads to an all-or-nothing outcome, aggravating partisan divides. Protests spread across the U.S. over the weekend after the release of footage showing the beating by police officers of Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old black motorist in Memphis, Tennessee. Protesters and police even clashed in New York, leading to the arrest of some protesters. Jung Eun-ju has the details.
Protesters took to the streets over the weekend to decry police brutality after the release of a video showing police officers in Memphis, Tennessee, beating the 29-year-old black motorist Tyre Nichols, who died 3 days later in the hospital. Police initially said they had pulled over Nichols for reckless driving. The January 7th footage from police body cameras and another mounted on a utility pole show officers repeatedly beating Nichols as he yells for his mother, far beyond a point where he could pose any threat. Protests have been spreading across the U.S. since the incident. Police arrested at least 3 people at a related demonstration in New York's Times Square on Friday. Demonstrators marched through Atlanta, Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Portland, among other cities across the nation on Saturday, raising signs bearing Nichols' name and calling for an end to abuses of authority. Protesters in Memphis, Tennessee on Saturday demanded justice for Nichols.
There's been too many times where my people, so many other impoverished communities have been targeted and abused, and it's not right.
Since Nichols' death, the 5 Memphis officers involved in the beating have been dismissed and charged with murder and kidnapping. The unit they were part of was disbanded, and Memphis lawmakers are planning police reform bills. President Joe Biden also said he was outraged and deeply pained after watching the video. Nichols' death marked the latest high-profile instance of police officers accused of using excessive force in the deaths of Black people and other minorities in recent years. Protests under the banner of the Black Lives Matter movement against racial injustice erupted globally following the May 2020 murder of George Floyd, a Black man who died after a white Minneapolis police officer knelt on his neck for more than 9 minutes. Jung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
Severely cold conditions will start to abate this week. Temperatures will get a tad warmer tomorrow, but do expect wide temperature gaps. Lows will be in the minus figures for most regions, while maximum temperatures will be jumping significantly. Southern parts of the country, including places like Gwangju and Uiseong, will see a huge difference of 15 degrees or more. Make sure to dress in layers to keep your body temperatures warm. Light snowfall is in store for northern central regions starting tomorrow daytime. Only light snowflakes are expected for Gyeonggi-do province and the surrounding regions. For northern parts of Gangwon-do province, 1 to 3 centimeters of snowfall is in the forecast. Please continue to take extra precautions out on the roads. They will be slippery. Tomorrow, Seoul will be starting off at -3 degrees and Busan at -1. Temperatures will be in the positive range for the daytime. Seoul will get up to 6 degrees, Daejeong 9, Gyeongju and Busan will be reaching 10 degrees Celsius. And no severe cold wave is in the forecast for the remainder of the week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
This brings us to the end of tonight's newscast. Thank you for staying with us. Hope everyone has a great start of the week.